Deep in the heart of the remote indo-Nepalese wilderness, a beast prowled the shadows in a menacing hegemony of 7 years, stalking its prey with deadly precision and claiming 436 lives. The Champawat tigress stands as the only feline ever recorded to have killed over 400 humans in a single spree of violence, weaving a constantly embedded folklore that would infuse terror into the hearts of many, a fear that would be passed down for generations to come. In the early 1900s, the South Asian region was beset by a terror unlike any other, as a plague of tiger attacks struck India and Nepal with particular ferocity. These majestic big cats, specifically the Bengal tigers, would stalk people in isolated villages, seeking out lone travelers, farmers, and especially groups of women and children to prey upon. They would appear in the form of streaks, emerging from the dense wood with a huff and a puff, ambushing their victims and then disappearing into the dark jungles once more, whilst dragging their kills with them. The Champawat tigress had an astonishingly long 7-year rampage, which can only be explained by the lack of her usual prey, large herbivores such as elk and deer. It was thought that this absence of her usual prey items may have driven her to hunt humans instead. In the 1900s, the now widely feared Champawat tigress hunted humans with what villagers would describe as an unquenchable thirst, brutally killing and consuming over 200 victims in just a few short years. Her name would invoke fear wherever it was mentioned, and terror would seem to reverberate through the air whenever it would be. The Bengal tiger is a formidable creature, boasting a bite force of over 1,050 pounds. That's almost double of that of an adult lion. Not only are their canines the sharpest in the cat family and capable of tearing through steel, they also have incredible speed and are able to run up to a blazing 40 miles per hour when in pursuit of prey. And what is perhaps the most chilling of all is their reputation for exacting revenge after years of simmering resentment. A perfect example of this would be the story covered in depth in a previous episode detailing a gruesome account of a tiger's revenge against a poacher. I will leave the link in the end screen for you. Please do note that it is age restricted and is a video that this platform does not deem appropriate for viewers of all ages, so viewer discretion is advised for that particular video. Even the soldiers at this point, trained and experienced in encounters with a variety of dangerous South Indian wildlife, found themselves outmatched by the Champawat's ferocity. The master of ambush would attack them without warning, of course when they'd least expect it, with the last thing many of its victims seeing being its claws and teeth flashing in the moonlight. With fatalities on the rise, the Nepalese authorities were forced to abandon their attempts to capture or kill the Champawat, and would thus implement a change in strategy. They would turn their efforts towards pushing the tigress deeper into the forest, towards the Indian border, in hopes that she would find new hunting grounds and leave the villagers in peace. The soldiers, along with local volunteers and poachers, would split into several groups and launch an assault on the Champawat beast, forcing it to retreat into Indian territory across a river named Sarda. This successful collaborative effort from the soldiers would bring an end to the tigress's extended period of causing upheaval and bloodshed, at least in Nepal, which lasted a grueling 4 long years. After being forced out of Nepal, the tigress would eventually appear in Champawat, a small town nestled in the North Indian region of Kumaon, in the state of Uttarakhand, where the gruesome ambushing and mass killing of locals by the tigress would continue to terrorize the community, and that too in dramatic fashion. As the killings continued unabated, the villagers of Champawat were left cowering in fear, barricaded within their homes as they waited for the arrival of the man, who was thought to be the only one capable of putting an end to her rampage, Sir Edward James Corbett. a former army officer and seasoned hunter summoned by the British government of Uttarakhand, would get word of the man-eating beast. An avid naturalist with extensive experience of hunting tigers throughout India, Corbett was well versed in the habits and behaviors of these majestic animals, but even he, after hearing the accounts of the Champawat tigress, had never recalled facing a challenge quite like this one where a man-eating feline that locals refer to as shaitan in Hindi, which translates to devil, or Satan in English, that has seemingly shook a whole nation. A nation which till today harbors the second largest number of humans in the world. It's a cold afternoon in 1907, the 7th year of the man-eater's reign of terror in Kumaon. A group of women from the nearby village of Pali set out on a mission to gather firewood and leaves for their households and livestock, armed with branch spears and verdant collecting baskets. As they traverse the treacherous muddy pathways, the women come upon a ravine filled with tall, ominous-looking cedar trees. The post-rainy weather is chilly, yet invigorating, and the clouds are still clearing the air of humidity. As the women gather their items from the cedar and eucalyptus trees, little do they know that they're being stalked. 16-year-old Premika Devi sits atop a thick branch, with a delicate stiletto slicer in hand and a golden foliage crate placed before her. Unbeknownst to her, however, the stealthy Champawat tigress has its sights locked on her and is getting in position for an ambush. And in the blink of an eye, the mighty big cat swiftly weaves through some thick, grassy patches, lowering her head into position to strike, her subtle footsteps silenced by the howling wind and the women's chatter. The tension then builds to a climax when the tigress reaches just a few feet away from the thicket where Premika was sitting, and gets in position to strike. The tiger lunges at Premika from behind with deadly precision. The gasps and screams of the women are overpowered by the tigress's fearsome, vengeful grunts that pierce the air like a hot knife through butter, sending tremors down the spines of her friends as they looked on helplessly in a state of pure shock and horror. Premika lets out a loud scream as she frantically slides down the tree, desperately trying to haul herself back to the branch and escape the tigress. But it was clear that she stood no chance against the deadly predator, as her incredible speed and agility would display itself, and in an instant, the 500-pound Bengal tigress unleashes a powerful swipe with its mighty paw, which would make contact with Premika's slender body, knocking her to the ground with force, at which point the tigress proceeds to savage her face, biting into and breaking her jaws with its powerful teeth before the eyes of her horrified friends. The women, who were perched up on tree branches, meanwhile scream, holler, and shriek while hurling stones at the tigress, causing her to pause for a moment and snarl at the group, warning them with a fearsome growl to stay away from its prey. And it's at this point that the tigress decides to deliver her notorious final blow, and swiftly bites into the vertebrae located between Premika's neck and spine, and ends her life with a powerful jerk of its head. And while letting out a final, desperate shriek, Premika falls silent, and the Champawat man-eater claims what was now her 435th victim. As she dragged Premika's lifeless body through the dense woodlands, her horrified friends would then run back to their homes as fast as they could, traumatically sobbing and screaming in horror all the way. Just days after Premika's death, aforementioned hunter Jim Corbett is finally faced with the mighty task of hunting down the mighty Champawat tigress. Armed with his trusty rifle, he arrives at the scene of Premika's attack as per the directions given to him by her friends, and thus begins to follow her trail of blood through the dark forest. Hours into the search, he finally comes across a few remains of Premika. It was her hand, which had been still attached to its radial bone, with shreds of flesh still loosely hanging off of it. Despite the unfavorable visibility due to the darkness of the forest, a determined Corbett, regardless of this, decides to continue the search for Premika's body by his lonesome. And so, after yet another few hours of searching, well into the middle of the night, he finally manages to locate the torn and heavily mutilated carcass of Premika, with bits of flesh residue still covering her face, which had an expression of having witnessed unimaginable terror etched onto it, while the rest of the body had for the most part been consumed. After a quick analysis of the situation and his findings, Corbett, with his years of experience in the jungle, knows that the tigress is likely still lurking nearby. And as if he were psychic, this is precisely when he hears some movement in the darkness behind some nearby brush. As he quickly turns around with his rifle at the ready, just a few seconds later, Corbett comes face to face with the unwavering gaze of the Bengal tigress as she emerges out of the brush and makes her way towards him without displaying a hint of fear. Realizing that not only does this tiger not fear an armed hunter, but is blatantly sizing him up as prey, Corbett then raises his rifle, takes aim, and fires a round at her. The agile tigress reacts swiftly and jumps out of harm's way, dodging the bullet, and thus runs off into the darkness before Corbett could get another shot. At this point, Corbett realizes that this was unlike any other tiger he'd ever hunted, that what he was dealing with was more than just an apex predator. It was a creature driven by a deep and insatiable hunger for man. In other words, there was no doubt in his mind that the Champawat tigress was at this point strictly a man-eater. Determined to take it down, Corbett would then return to his camp and devise a much stronger plan. With the dawn of the next day bringing forth news of yet another killing by the man-eater in the village of Pali, Corbett then calls upon a group of volunteers and leads a charge to confront the tigress during the day. The strategy was to drive the tigress out of the dense Champawat woods and into a clearing where he would take her down with a precision shot. And so the experienced big game hunter manages to gather 300 volunteers, and armed with drums, pots, and other noise-making instruments, he would lead them atop a small hill overlooking the dense Champawat forest into a particular region where the tigress was believed to be hiding. Corbett then heads the command as the men commence a charge towards the tiger's territory, as they simultaneously shout and bang on the drums, announcing their presence with a deafening racket that in just seconds forces the otherwise much more stealthy tigress to present herself as she leaps out of some thick brush and runs straight towards the clearing, just as Corbett had anticipated. With the tigress in range, Corbett, who was also accompanied by a local police sheriff, successfully manages to hit the tiger with 2 shots, one which struck her face and the other in the abdomen. But to his surprise, the mighty tigress still wouldn't go down, at which point she charges Corbett. With not enough time to reload, and with his life flashing before his eyes, the raging tigress would get just meters away from Corbett when, to his good fortune, the aforementioned local police sheriff fires a shot, hits the tigress in the left foot just 20 meters away from him. This was the only time that the resilient tigress would finally display any hint of having given up, and the man-eater of Champawat, after its estimated 436th kill, would finally be slain. The investigation of the tigress's body later revealed that she had a broken upper left canine, which had likely been the result of an unsuccessful poaching attempt. They would go on to reach the conclusion that it was this very injury that not just impacted her ability to hunt her typical prey, but would ignite from within her what is now believed to be a seemingly common response from her kind, one that's fueled by vengeance. If this episode sparked your interest, then our last episode about Hollywood's worst grizzly bear attack is sure to do the same. You can find it on the end screen of this video.